Today we're going to talk about generic query plans in CockroachDB and how they can improve the performance of some of your queries. Where possible, CockroachDB will cache the queries that are generated by the cost-based optimizer. These could be selects, inserts, updates, or deletes. This improves performance as it eliminates the work required to repeatedly plan the same query. And there are two types of queries that can be cached. Custom query plans, which are optimized for queries and their placeholder values. As the placeholder values change, so too does the optimized plan. And then there are generic query plans. These are optimized once for queries that include parameters, but they're only optimized once per query, irrespective of the placeholder values. For example, if you've just prepared a statement that takes query arguments and you're planning to execute that prepared statement multiple times with different query arguments, generic query plans could improve the performance of that query. Similarly, if you're doing a query that involves the joining of many tables, generic query plans can offer performance boosts there as well. And the behavior of how to cache a query is controlled by the plan cache mode setting. And you can set one of three values for this. There is force custom plan, which is the default value and will ensure that query plans get regenerated whenever new placeholder values are encountered. There's force generic plan, which only caches a query plan once, irrespective of arguments. And then there's auto, which we recommend for most purposes. This will default to using the custom plan, but after 5 consecutive runs of the same query, if it would be cheaper to run a generic query plan, CockroachDB will switch to that. Let's have a look at a complex query and how generic query plans can help. First, I'll create a cluster and connect to it. Next, I'll create 20 tables, which will simulate a complex ERP or manufacturing system. And I'll insert data into each of them. And then I'll run the same application with different plan cache modes. The first will use auto, the second will use force custom plan, and finally we'll use force generic plan, just to see how each of these three compare. The application prepares a statement and will execute it 500 times for each. And these are the results. We can see that auto and force generic plan perform the same because auto allows CockroachDB to figure out the best mechanism to use, and generic query plans are decided to be the best plan to use. And the force custom plan is slower than both by quite a margin. And this is because the query is re-optimized on every execution as opposed to just once at the start of the session. Let's dive a bit deeper now to see what things look like within CockroachDB itself. This is the complex query that my application is running. There's one placeholder value for organization ID, and I'm preparing a statement called manufacturing efficiency, which I can later execute. First, we'll use force custom plan. That sets the plan cache mode to force custom plan for this session. It can also be set at the role or database level, and I'll run and explain analyze for the execution of that prepared statement with this argument. As you can see, there are a lot of things going on in this query plan, and that's an artifact of the complexity of this query. So right at the top, we see that the planning time was 17 milliseconds and the plan type used was custom, as expected. I'll run that again and we'll see that the planning time is still high and the plan type is still custom, i.e. the query plan hasn't been cached because we're forcing it to use the custom plan. Let's look at force generic plan now. I'll run explain execute here. And this time we have a high planning time initially, but it's recognized that it can use generic query plans. So it's re-optimized for that. And if I run it again, we're now in microseconds of planning time because we can now reuse that plan. It's being cached and it will be fast for every execution within this session. And finally, we'll take a look at auto. I'll run the same query again. They're all using different organization IDs. This time we have a higher planning time and we're using the plan type custom at the moment, but after a number of executions, still custom, generic reused. CockroachDB has figured out that it can optimize this query using generic query plans, and the planning time is back down to microseconds. If you're using prepared statements and those statements involve the joining of many tables, generic query plans could be a really good option to boost the performance of your CockroachDB queries. As a rule of thumb, the auto plan cache mode is a great option to start with though, as it will allow CockroachDB to determine the most optimal query plan and caching method for your queries.